Yeah. There she is.
Okay, you guys ready to go? Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Anansi Press, and I'm an event facilitator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory and that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Innuwak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene people, and the homeland of the Red River Métis. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're gathered here tonight to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of North of Nowhere, a Song of Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner by Dr. Marie Wilson. We are grateful to House of Anansi Press for publishing this volume and for their assistance in planning this evening. Award-winning actor, creative producer, former MP, and TRC honorary witness Tina Keeper will host the gathering. Jennifer Moore Rattray, of the former ED of the National Inquiry and COO of the Southern Chiefs Organization, will lead a conversation with Dr. Wilson. This event follows the 16th anniversary of the Statement of Apology issued by Canada to former residential school students. If time permits, following the formal part of tonight's program, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. If you are here in person, please lift up your hand. I will approach you with the microphone so that everybody here and at home can hear you. And if you are watching live on our YouTube stream, please feel free to type your question into the chat room, and I will do my best to pass it along to our guests. I'll be back at the end of the evening to review our signing procedures, but for now, I have the pleasure of introducing your host this evening, Tina Keeper, who is best known for her work on the hit television series North of 60, her service as a member of Parliament for the federal riding of Churchill, and her development and production of Indigenous content for film and television. She served as an honorary witness for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Canada. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Regret. Sani. I just thank you so much. Tina Keeper and Indigenous cause, and I'm so very proud to be here tonight. And I'm so grateful that Dr. Marie Wilson wrote this book. I have to say that it has been a dear friendship that I've had with Marie, and that she has been an extraordinary leader in working in Canada as an ally. And I first met her when I was doing North of 60 many years ago, 32 years ago. And yeah, and she was the Director General of CBC North. And she was just this amazing human being who could reach anybody's heart. And she has been able to do this work, this extraordinary work that she did with the TRC, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was so delicate. And it actually was something that happened in this country that I think was so extraordinary as the child of two survivors, both my parents, that I didn't even want to participate or, I'd never made a statement outside of being an honorary witness. And that's how delicate the work has been, is to be able to work with survivors and to work with their families and to work with governments. And so she is an extraordinary person. And I'm so thrilled that you're here. I'm so thrilled that I'm here. And I'm so thrilled that we're joined by Jennifer Moore Rattray. I know she had a bit of an introduction, but I do need to tell you that she too is an extraordinary human being. And she has been most recently doing work for the federal government in a special role for the Prime Minister's office and cabinet. And that has to do with the 93 calls to action. And she can tell you a bit more about that. She also is from the Peepkeesis Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. And we are the two Cree friends of anybody who comes along, like Dr. Marie and people in the audience. And so, but she has been an outstanding leader as well and has given so much space and so much, she has provided the path for Indigenous women and survivors to be able to bring their stories to government. So we thank you so much for that. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce to you to Jennifer Rattray Moore. She's going to be our moderator, and she will be discussing the book with Dr. Marie Wilson.
I am going to start. My first important duty is to have our beautiful friend, Dr. Marie Wilson, say a few words. And then I'm going to get into the questions, but I'm going to hold myself back right now. And Marie, over to you, please.
Thank you. And I do see a number of faces, beloved faces. Some of them I haven't seen for a long time, and people that I've known from various walks of life, and some of them pre-TRC as well. So thank you so much for being here. It really means a lot to me. I'm just Marie, you know, you all know that. The fact that I'm here tonight, I just want to draw your attention to a couple of things. And one is, I'm very aware of the fact that the TRC had its headquarters here in Winnipeg, and I'm sure that many or all of you are aware of that as well. I see some of our former staff are here, so you know perfectly well where you worked. But because there was a person missing who would otherwise seem like a logical person in the room, and that was our chair, Murray Sinclair. Most of you know him far better than you know me, and I just want to acknowledge that this is his home territory, and I also want you to know that I had a wonderful conversation with him earlier today. He can't be here for the reasons that some of you know, but he wanted me to pass on a message of support for my book, and particularly he said to make sure that it is conveyed that he thinks that what the book has allowed for us to hear what survivors had to say and what we received from them. And I think he meant that widely in terms of the country, that it's really important and that he's glad for that. So in that way, I just want to bring his presence into the room here with us. And I'm grateful for all the work that we did together. Thank you so much, Tina, for your opening remarks. I look forward to the conversation with Jennifer. And I think it wasn't specifically flagged, but if you have questions, I hope you'll bring them forward as well. I wanted to read you a little bit actually from the book, if you'll allow me, rather than any kind of speechifying. And I'm going to read a little bit that will just set the scene a little bit or remind you a bit about the TRC. And then I wanted to give you a little snapshot insight into the commissioners, our very, very first meeting. And then I wanted to read a little something that I'm going to dedicate to Doris, because there's something that I've written. I want to acknowledge her as a member of our TRC Survivors Committee. That was the advisory survivor community that walked with us throughout the commission. And I want to also just use this moment to acknowledge any other survivors who were in the room, and intergenerational survivors, and families of survivors, present and past, because we all know that one of the things that has happened over this past timeline that you've talked about, Tina, is that we've lost a lot of survivors. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, so that voices that we can no longer turn to first person, we have a record of what some of their teachings were and some of what they had to say. So let me start with this. The TRC had a huge job with many distinct parts. It was physically exhausting work. We pushed ourselves hard, trying to take the commission as deeply into this vast country as we could, always knowing that we did not have enough time or money to do all that we might have wanted. Our original 5-year mandate eventually became 6.5. The work was also emotionally and spiritually exhausting, at times soul-crushing. We recorded statements from close to 7,000 residential school survivors, all voluntary participants from among the estimated 80,000 who were still alive at the time the TRC was established. Our commission's 2015 final report and calls to action are based on the many recurring themes that emerge from those voices from coast to coast to coast. And I talk a lot about how the TRC came to be in the book, so that's just to, I don't have time to go into all of that, but it's outlined, because I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that this was not a government commission. This was a hard-fought commission, won through the courts and ordered as an obligation on the government to create. Over the years of the commission, I also noted recurring themes of a different sort. The common themes and the many questions I was asked over and over again. How did you get to be a commissioner? How did your commission hold it together while many others struggle or collapse? How could you bear day after day to hear such terrible things that happen to children? How did you take care of yourself, and what kept you going? What is the worst thing you heard? What moved you the most? What do you hope will come out of the commission's work? How has the TRC changed you? What will you do after the commission? Partial answer, write a book. And where is your hope? While the TRC was in motion, the demands of my days left little time to answer such big questions. I needed to give my full attention in order to keep moving forward, to avoid sinking down into the horrors of what I was so often hearing. I needed to protect myself so that I could keep going, so as to honor my part in seeing the TRC through to completion. Now, with the hard work of reconciliation just beginning in this country, I believe these questions asked of me are still valid, warranting deeper reflection. I want to share the wealth of what I have experienced. I recognize what a privileged vantage point I had as a TRC commissioner. No one else sat where I sat. No one else saw through my eyes or felt the vibrations of this experience at closer range. It was a life-altering experience that permeated into me and that continues beyond the commission to reframe the way I see myself and the world around me. As a commissioner, I hope to offer insights into aspects of our TRC that I believe made a positive difference. As a citizen, I aim to provoke further thinking about the potency and imperative of reconciliation in Canada. And as a loving mother and grandmother, one who has now borne witness to the devastation of so many generations of children's lives, I seek to heal my own aching heart. So walk with me, for this story is also about you, about all of us. And then I wanted to introduce you to our little commissioner team. Picture a mid-star hotel in the cluster across the highway from the Edmonton airport. Indigenous owned and with a reputation for great food. On June 18th, 2009, we met there 2 weeks before we were officially on the job. Willie drove north from his home in Musquechies. Murray flew west from Winnipeg. I flew south from Yellowknife. I felt new excitement on that old flight I had done hundreds of times before. I was heading toward my first real encounter with two men I had admired from afar for years, my new colleagues. The Willie I'm talking about is Chief Wilton Littlechild, Cree lawyer from Alberta. The Murray is Murray Sinclair, Anishinaabe judge from Manitoba. And me, Marie Wilson, journalist, TV host, teacher, and executive manager from the Northwest Territories. Marie Wilson, Southerner turned Northerner. Marie Wilson, world traveler, Canadian born, but one time resident of France and Burkina Faso. I am perhaps that most undefinable thing of all, a non-Indigenous Canadian, at least not Indigenous to this place. I was raised to be proud of being Scottish Canadian, and I am a woman. I am a daughter, sister, wife, and mother. I am grandmother. Our first encounter as three commissioners of the historic Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada had all the nervousness, energy, anticipation, and excitement of an arranged marriage. Our arrivals were staggered, so Murray, as commission chair, had told us to meet at his hotel room when we got there. When I arrived, he filled the door frame with his warm smile and commanding presence. I remembered that rich baritone voice from many years before, when he was speaking to a crowd at the Yellowknife Inn about his work leading the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry of Manitoba. I remembered his impact and inspiration as the first Indigenous judge in Manitoba, the second in all of Canada. The room was in awe. Willie arrived soon after in what I came to recognize as one of his signature summer golf shirts. Willie was wearing, sorry, I'm jumping ahead, professional sports. Just jumped in the wrong place, right? I'm sorry. So he was wearing a golf shirt the day that I ran into him in Geneva as well, on a street there where he and others were fighting over whether or not to include the letter S in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Always the lawyer, but also always the athlete. Professional sports had been his first career. His induction into multiple athletic halls of fame and his founding role in the North American Indigenous Games would later mean as much to him as being an architect of that UN declaration. Unlike my fellow commissioners, I was not a lawyer, but as a teacher turned journalist, I had spent a lot of my professional life reporting from rooms defined by laws and observing political decision-making, strategizing, and occasional grandstanding at all levels of public and Indigenous governments. I was in Ottawa in the 1980s during multi-year negotiations to get Section 35 Aboriginal rights entrenched into the highest law in the land. I was a featured reporter when Pope John Paul II came north to Fort Simpson in 1987. In the 1990s, I traveled back and forth to South Africa, training print and radio reporters in television skills to cover their first democratic election after the end of the racial segregationist policy of apartheid. It was a time of journalistic reckoning, a recommitment to seek and tell the public the truth, no matter what. And now, here we were, the judge, the jock, and the journalist, each devoted to justice and the law, human rights, fair play, fact-finding, truth-telling, and accountability. A new common purpose would bind us together. For the next several years, we would be researching, recording, and documenting more than a century of forced residential schooling for Indigenous children, educating an ignorant Canada about the history and ongoing legacy of those schools, and inspiring nationwide efforts toward lasting reconciliation. The background, perspective, and expertise that each of us brought to such a huge, wide-ranging job turned out to be an essential, near-perfect mix. But on that day in Edmonton, in June 2009, we were still just getting to know each other. And then, if it's not too long, I would like to read a section for you, Doris. The TRC mandate called for us to work with an Indian Residential School Survivor Committee. We renamed it the TRC Survivors Committee. Like the commissioners, the 10 members of the Survivors Committee came from various parts of the country. They too were expected to immediately begin working together while still getting to know each other, and while some of them were still tripping over their own childhood memories of residential school. The committee had 7 First Nation members, 2 Inuit, and 1 Métis, roughly reflecting the proportion of survivors from each of those groups and the diversity within them. And I'll specifically name Doris Young and Gordon Williams from Central Canada, and John Morrison reflected the Manitoba Métis homeland. The Survivors Committee advised us on a number of things, but one of them was on the location and the themes for 7 national events that we had to hold. And the very first one was here in Winnipeg. The Survivors Committee concluded that TRC national events be in Vancouver, Edmonton, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, Montreal, Halifax, and Inuvik. Finally, they assigned the theme for each national event based on the 7 sacred teachings of what had by now become our TRC logo. As these events unfolded, each carefully chosen theme seemed perfectly matched to the place, the stories, and the moment. I shall forever honor the essential contributions of the TRC Survivors Committee to the work of the Commission. They were our advisors. Some were elders. They became our cherished friends. They gave us their best, and several have since joined the ancestors. But for now, they were expert guides on the TRC journey, following the path of national milestones we charted together. As I reflect on those early works of the TRC, including the 2 magical days in Edmonton in June 2009, when 3 new commissioners met for the very first time, I noticed something more clearly than before. We built ourselves a firm foundation of overlapping circles. We were a circle of commissioners within a circle of support, our circle of survivors, encircled all parts of the country. We planned a circuitous journey following the flames of a circular logo. All our careful intentions aimed for spiritual healing. We had already come full circle, mind, body, heart, and spirit, and we had just begun.
So beautiful, Marie. I'm going to introduce myself traditionally, briefly. Gawita Madanawa, Nuihuania, Jennifer Moore Rattray, a really proud member of Papixi's Cree Nation, just over the colonial border in Saskatchewan, what is now called Saskatchewan, but my mom's family was originally from northern Manitoba, from Norway House, from Bonabonabee, now also known as Oxford House, or previously known as Oxford House, and also Fisher River Cree Nation. So just really, really so honored to be here. And a number of my family members attended Brandon Residential School, and 4 of them didn't return home. So the really important, really beautiful work that Marie and the commission did, and the Beautiful Survivors group committee did, to really highlight that as well, which is of course the really important work that's going on right now through the special interlocutor for missing children and unmarked graves. So a really important legacy from the work that you did. So I have so many questions as a recovering journalist, as a former journalist, but I'm going to limit it to 4, 1 for each of the directions, and then turn it over to you if you have any questions. So I'm going to start with my first one, which is, you know, I kind of took this from Marie's book, because as the consummate journalist, she of course has the best questions. But I think it's really important, and it is a breathtaking book, by the way, an absolutely breathtaking book. So I'll leave it there. I cried when I read certain pages, and I also laughed a lot. So it's a really, really beautiful book. So I'll stop there. You talk about the incredible dream team. You kind of teased us there with the part that you read, and really, and the excellence of the 3 of you working together was just so incredible. You complemented each other so well. I'm going to ask the question, how did you get to be a commissioner? What an amazing job. I mean, to lead the most important work, I feel, that this country is doing, to be a part of history. How did you get to be a commissioner? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it is the most boring of all answers. I applied for the job.
But what brought you there?
You know, some of you may remember, and not to dwell on it, nor did we. The apology, as Tina mentioned, in the anniversary came in 2008, and there was a commission named at that time. And for reasons that we didn't delve into, it didn't have staying power. So we were the second coming, as I like to say. We really had an obligation built into that, which is that we couldn't let survivors down a second time. That's how we felt about it. And so I, for a whole lot of reasons, some of which I talk about in the book, I was not in a position to even think about it at the time of the first commission when it was struck. And it's one of those moments where you sort of think, gee, timing is not coincidental. It wasn't meant for me then, but when it came around again, a number of things had happened on the home front, let me just say, and I felt that I was in a place where I had something to offer. Didn't mean I would be chosen, but I had something to offer. And we actually had a big conversation, Stephen and I. My husband is also a residential school survivor. And we talked about it. He's also, he was the premier of the territories. He was the head of the Dene Nation. He has a lot of experience beyond being a survivor. And I said, well, you should apply. And he said, no, I think you should apply. And we talked about it. We said, well, what if if we both apply, are we just going to cancel each other out? How do we be strategic about this? And finally, he said, and I tell you these stories with his permission, by the way, but he said, you know what, Marie? He said, you should apply because you could do it. I don't know if I could bear it, he said. I don't know if I could bear it. And you could. And he was saying that partly to honor my journalism background, where those of you who have been in that profession know you're trained to have to figure out how do you continue functioning in the eye of the storm, and no matter what's going on, and to just focus and do the thing and then deal with whatever the fallout is afterwards on your own time. But in the moment, you've got to be there. So that was when I was thinking about what could I offer. And the real shorthand is that we'd had a kind of family truth and reconciliation reckoning. You'll have to read the book to know more about that. But I really felt hopeful that if it's possible within a family, then maybe it's possible within a community, and maybe it's possible within a country. And at least I'll offer what I have learned and what I know. I was also raised in one of the faith traditions that ran residential schools. I had no idea of that at the time. But like, most people, I would say, in Christian congregations around the country, most of us had no idea that there was a whole other side to what the churches were doing, and working on contracts to make money for themselves, and we didn't know that. So I thought, well, somebody's got to be typical of all the ignorance. I was raised in that same ignorance, and that's an important perspective. But I was also raised with a whole lot of good people. So I knew the starting point was not to say, this bunch of people are really good and this bunch of people are really bad. We had to find ways to create opportunities for good people to find each other and to do way better by getting quiet and listening to each other and learning from each other. And I thought, well, I can put that forward. And I had a lot of professional skills. Just, this was a big project. Project management's a big deal. Somebody has to know how to do some of that. And I didn't hold it exclusively, but I knew I could offer some things. And then I also felt very strongly that we had to create productions that would lift people up. It couldn't all be just, here's all the stuff that, here are the harms. We had to find ways to lift people up, including ourselves. And that required complex productions. And I had done a lot of big productions. Tina was referring to some time that we spent together. And I'm not expert on that, but I knew a lot. So I put all those things forward and offered the best of what I felt I had to offer. And lucky me, I was chosen to be one of the 3 commissioners.
And I think we're all really lucky that you were chosen.
Oh yeah, plus the North. I felt very strongly that the North has such a high concentration of residential school survivors. I felt it was very important that we have a very recurring tendency in our country to think the North is all Inuit, and we stereotype it that way. And yet some of the longest running schools were in the First Nations parts of northern Canada, from way back in the 1800s till right through the 1990s. And the other thing that ended up proving to be really important is I speak French.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a bilingual capacity on the commission as well.
Absolutely. Well, I attended the event in Winnipeg, and also in Vancouver. So I was fortunate to be able to attend 2 of them, and they were just so excellent and to your point about lifting people up, I think was exactly difficult, unbelievably difficult, but also really beautiful events. And now that I know you, I can see your touch on them. So thank you for that. You spent 6.5 years for the commission, but 6 years listening to the truths of our country, the truths that survivors shared and intergenerational survivors shared. What was the most transformational moment for you in all of that truth?
So I'll speak very personally here, because I heard outstanding things in every single hearing that we went to. And I'm not just talking about 7 national events. We had hundreds of community events. And there was always something that was so profoundly stirring. But you asked me one, and personally, and I have to honestly say the revelations that were the most important or meaningful to me were the ones that happened in my own family. Mm-hmm. Because my family was so typical of so many families, which is that I was married for 15 years to Stephen before I had any idea what had happened to him. And that was, I think, I don't want it to sound frivolous, but it was the magic. It was the power of our gatherings that they fed on each other. They furnished courage to each other. I would say the courage of one led to the encouragement of the other, and people who would come forward and say, I had no intentions of speaking today. I just came to watch and to listen. And they'd say, but having listened to everyone else, I realized I too have something to say. And that was happening in my own home. Cone of silence for 15 years. And then somebody else, not my husband, started talking about what had happened. And then it allows the layers of the onion to be peeled and people to get deeper and deeper into the heart of things and to get more and more honest with themselves about things that people have had good reason to try to either reimagine in their minds as a survival method or to ignore or to try to bury. You know, it takes a lot of fresh air to be able to get some of those things out and up. And where I felt it most personally, because it's where I spent most of my time, and continue to, is in my own home, in my own extended family, and the way we've been able to be with our kids and our grandchildren.
I know at the beginning of each of our events at the National Inquiry, we talked about protecting our spirits and the need to do that. And I only have the 14 months of my experience there, so I can't imagine the 6.5 years that you had. How did you and the other commissioners and those staff, those involved with the really hard work and the responsibility of that really hard work, how did you care for yourselves? How did you protect your spirits?
Well, one of the things, and I do write about this in those early chapters actually, and I'll be forever grateful to Murray for this. His guidance was to say we will each need a spiritual advisor. A designated, not an idea in the back of your head that you might get around to, but somebody who actually has a name, address, a phone number, and who's going to be brought into the circle. And we each did have one, and I think that was a tremendously helpful thing. In my case, it doesn't matter who I would ever have chosen, they would never have been at close range because I live north of 60 and it's a long ways to anywhere really. But always at the national events we had them present, and my arrangement with mine was always available on call as necessary. But we also had a tremendous team of health supports. Those who negotiated the settlement agreement, they were the wise ones who said we need culturally appropriate health supports, and we had that. And we saw that those teams grow and grow in their own knowledge and their own expertise and their own skill and their ability to support people. We saw that. Like we were like this osmotic organism moving across the country that was refining and evolving itself as we went. And that was true with just about every aspect, including the health support. So I called on whatever health supports were available and became very close to 2 or 3 people who were regularly involved in debriefing. We also took good care of each other. You know, we paid attention to each other. We became familiar with each other's stories. So, you know, you listen acutely and you realize, okay, we're going to need to call a break here because I know what's going to be going, you know, either because you can feel your own self wobbling or because you know someone else on your team is very possibly being triggered right now by someone else's story, you know. So we watched out and took care in that way. We had circles of friends pretty well everywhere we went. One of the gifts Tina always brought to us was enormous laughter. I can't tell you the number of belly laughs we had over whenever we had a chance to have a meal together over stupid stuff, but it didn't matter. We would take anything, you know. And then we programmed laughter, and I do write about that. We actually programmed laughter and things that would make us laugh into our activities.
You'll have to read about the fashion show. We're not going to tell you now. One more question before we turn it over to see if you have questions. And we should give a shout out, as they say, to Dr. Phil Fontaine from our territory here, a member of Saugeen Anishinaabe First Nation, and one of the lead negotiators for the settlement agreement for, you know, making sure that those health supports were in there. But my final question for you, and again, I have so many, but I'm exercising great self-control, and that is, what do you hope for Canada? We've talked about truth. This is the reconciliation question. What do you hope for Canada? What's your vision for the future of Canada?
and I do say it quite specifically in the book, actually, and it's not a commission conclusion. It's my own very personal hope there, and I've said it over the years, so it's not like it's a new thing. But so I'll say a specific thing, and I'll say a more general thing. Specifically, what I hope is that all of our children will have a far better chance than past generations have had to grow up feeling proud and clear in who they are, and that they are well loved, and that there are people near at hand who love them. That I hope, and then I hope all of the generations coming on, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, are being properly educated so that our children are taught to stand up for human rights and to know and understand the devastation that happens when those are betrayed. In terms of our country, what I hope for the country, and this is not a kind of in Marie's lifetime kind of thing, pretty sure of that, but I remain optimistic and hopeful because I know how many good people I've met, not just during the journey of this TRC, but in my lifetime. And you have to, I think, always believe that good people are going to do good things. They're going to try hard to do good things. And what I would love to see, honestly, is that Canada come to a point of reckoning with its own identity, that it would be able to see itself as a proud Indigenous country to which people from all over the world have been made welcome over the past few centuries. There's a story that I share in the book from actually an Inuk elder who said, you know, this is a very long story. I'm saying it backwards. This is a very, what he was saying about residential schools is he was saying, this is a very short story. It's a very long story in the history of Canada, but it is a very short story in the history of humans. And if you can reimagine it that way and sort of think, you know, playing the long game, as we say in sports, you know, you're playing for the long game. You're doing everything you can in the short term, everything you can, but not giving up hope that when you're done doing what you are able to do, that other good people are going to continue on and keep doing good things, and we will redefine ourselves. And if we want to think simplistically or maybe with simpler examples, we know lots of things that have changed in our society. In my lifetime, lots of things. You know, I remember, I was just recalling with somebody the other day being on a long, arduous picket line for 7 months in Quebec City when I was a national reporter there. And guess what? The biggest thing we were fighting for. It sounds so unbelievable now. Maternity benefits.
Mhm.
Yeah, maternity benefits. And, you know, we've evolved.
Thank
past
goodness.
that. You're welcome.
Do I owe you? Of course I do.
Well, I'll just put it this way, we were on strike for so long that we won the benefit, but I didn't qualify because I've been on strike for too long.
Anansi.
Yes, Marcy Cho. And I'd like to now take this opportunity for you to ask questions. If anybody has any questions for Marie Wilson.
Can I just say, while you're getting your questions together, no, because I see Ginny Devine here, and you know, there are things about the commission that you don't know because they didn't all happen in Canada. You know, and when Ginny and your former premier, but Gary Devine was the ambassador, Canadian ambassador in Washington.
Gary Dewar.
Who did I say?
Gary Devine. I love it. It's so good.
Well, it's about
How
time.
good is that?
Or as I sometimes call her, the Divine Miss Ginny. Yes, Gary Dewar. I do know who I'm talking about, actually. But he did amazing things there. You know, he held a really important forum, brought influential people together. And this was in the early days of the commission, and said, you know, there's something big happening in Canada. You need to be aware of this. that sort of forum, when you're convened by people who are holding those positions of influence and authority and reputation, can make a big difference. And part of the reason I tell that story is because I'm really happy to see Jimmy, but also because there were lots of people doing lots of good things, and I find it's really easy these days for everyone to get really bummed out and say, oh, reconciliation, that doesn't happen anymore, or whatever. And I don't buy that, and I don't go there. And I try to tell stories of great people doing great things, whether you happen to personally to know about it or not, doesn't mean it didn't happen. And I also know that there are a lot of deniers now going around giving themselves great voice, and I don't remember meeting a single one of them at one of our TRC events. So I don't know where they were when all that hard work was being done, but they weren't in our rooms. So that was an interruption. There was a call out for questions or comments or anything.
We have one in the back.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to you and all of the survivors who came forward during the commission and who have continued to show their strength and integrity as the years go on. I was one of those blissfully ignorant white kids in a North End school who really didn't understand the impact of everything. In fact, I clearly remember a textbook that is, I'm sure somewhere still out there, where the teacher held up this book, and obviously we studied from it a bit, where it just had a picture of two Inuit girls, and the caption underneath it was, "Do these children look happy? And how are we to, fix the system and make these kids happy?" That being said, and this is kind of a strange word to use, is there any closure in all of this? And I know it is an ongoing process for people who have survived this, who are still working with the DRC. Is there closure? And I say, again, kind of put an asterisk by that word, because I think it's a very simplistic word to a very complex issue. Any thoughts on that?
Good question.
Well, first of all, just to be clear, the TRC doesn't exist anymore, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What you have here is the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, so the names I know are confusing, but what they hold very importantly is all of the holdings, apart from the work they themselves are doing to carry on, they hold all the records and materials from the TRC and all of our hearings. I would just say that the question doesn't have a simple answer or a singular answer. Some people may well feel that they have had some personal closure. It may be because they've been able to speak to their child honestly for the first time, or it may be because they've been honest with themselves, or it may be, we've had ceremonies actually of reconciliation between Inuit and Dene, who went to school in the same schools together and were kind of set up in collision to each other. But it's not the same answer for everybody, just as what was the school experience like for you, not the same answer for everybody. And so I can't answer the question absolutely, but I do know this, reconciliation is the one piece of our TRC mandate that did not say it's a 5-year project. It said it's ongoing. And so what I know about that is that the work of truth telling has to carry on so that the work of reconciliation can also carry on. I don't think they're linear. I'm not sitting here holding my breath till all the truth gets out before we can start reconciliation. I don't think it works like that, and I saw I write about it in the book as well. But people are at where they are at, and that's why there's such a strong need for us to understand as a society that a whole lot of people have barely begun or maybe not even yet. And that's before we talk about all the intergenerational survivors who haven't had a forum that was meant just for them and haven't had anywhere to articulate the experiences that they may have gone through or may indeed still be going through.
Good question, thank you. Yeah, one in the back over here.
Hi, can you say something about the 93 calls to action, the ones that have been acted on somewhat, the ones that haven't, the ones that maybe, how you feel about all of it?
So the 94, right? The 94 calls, I don't know which one you're taking a pass on, but they're all important. Those numbers are killer, right? And it's not an exhaustive list. I'm just teasing. That's Heather Frayne. She worked with us for a time at the TRC, did some really great work. And we also had a prior life in the north, actually, with the CBC. There's a lot of CBC glue in this place. You know, one of the things I will say, and I've kind of said it like a broken record since the end of the commission. For me, the really essential ones to implement, first, if you're serious about all this, we're 53 to 56, and they're all about creating a national council for reconciliation. And the reason for that is, as I've said many times before, we are a great, big, beautiful country, but we need editing. You know, it is impossible for any one part to know what all the other parts are doing and what everybody else is doing. And if we don't have a mechanism that actually has a mandate and some authority to pull in information and to create an honest picture of ourselves, an honest mirror to say, here's how you're doing, Canada. This is, wow, look at this great stuff happening here, and whoa, things are getting way worse here. And what is it that's making this so successful? Can we redeploy some of that to here? And, you know, basically, and if we're not doing anything on these ones, why is that? Who's the holdup? Is that bad faith? Is that just pure political ill will? Or is there some other problem that we don't know about? So we don't have that yet, and they've passed legislation. My understanding is, I mean, I've kind of dropped off of the inner circle of being told about anything that's going on, but I have followed the news to know that the legislation for that, I do believe, passed quite recently. Who knows how long it will take to stand it up, as it were, to get people in there and so on. I know there was a lot of delay caused by membership and who gets to be on it and who isn't on it. I know those are really important things, but I also know that you can lose another 20,000 survivors not being able to agree on something really basic, like who's going to sit in the room, bring a good heart, and make wise decisions. And I don't think that's the exclusivity of this group or that group or that group or this portion of that. I think if you bring good people together who are committed to trying to do a good thing, you should be able to achieve good results, especially if you don't have government breathing down your neck with legislation and you are acting independently, which is what we were able to do with the commission. So in short, some of them have been done. You know what, some of them do have a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. A lot of schools, a lot of jurisdictions have developed and created new curriculum, but we also have examples of some places where there was work being done on that and then there was a change of government and all the funding got pulled. So whatever has happened, you can take a moment in time and say what's done and what isn't. I think more as what is the continuum? Are we getting better or aren't we? And are we keeping the momentum going? There was a big rush of momentum at the end of the TRC, and that's where I think all of us here as citizens have to keep asking our would-be elected leaders and such, what are you planning to do? And what do you stand for? And keep the pressure on so that our kids do learn what they need to learn and so that things can change.
I think we have a little wiggle room. We have somebody else who indicated. One last question. Oh.
Thank you. Nice to see you all doing a wonderful job. So proud of you all. I have a question. We talk about it often at work. It's the largest settlement that was ever negotiated. We use that as an example of opening the doors for all these other class actions that First Nations have filed against the federal government. There's numerous class actions that have been settled, but there's more in the works. There's so many things that were happening concurrently when residential schools were being implemented. How do you see that future? Like, that opened the door for these class actions. What else have you seen this TRC open the doors for other things? But going back to the class actions, when we think about it, it boggles the mind. There's the annuity payments, there's the plows and cows, there's housing, wellness, you need water. And I believe that these, like this, the TRC and the class action open the doors for that. Where do you see it going? Because the federal government seems to want us to make sure that we fight those, like we go to court and we have to have these settlements. So I'm just looking for your views and your opinions on that.
Well, I want to be, thank you, Joy, and I want to be really clear. I don't presume to be expert on a whole lot of other class actions. And I don't even presume to be expert on this class action on its legal aspects. I mean, I obviously have read it all, I understand it. But the legal technicalities are where you have different kind of expertise for that. What I think is this. I think that we can completely confuse the public if we get so many lists of so many calls to action and so many calls for justice and so on, and especially where there are things that are essentially on the same theme. Because I find governments respond by checklist, and they don't realize, no, we're actually talking about the same story. Jennifer and I did a presentation together one time and we agreed, well, I'll go first because I'll talk about the TRC. It's kind of, in a way, umbrella. If you think about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry as being one of the identifiable legacies of residential schools. It's not only to do with residential schools, but there's definitely a connection. And the reason I say that confidently is because many people told us. They came as survivors and told us, as a result of this, and this, my daughter that, my sister that, my whatever. So that connection was being made. We just didn't have time to do the kind of deeper look at that we felt it warranted, which is why we called for a separate inquiry, as did many others, to address that issue. But I think what we have to try to do, if we really want wider society to feel like this actually matters to the whole country, and I'm constantly pushing back against letting it be marginalized as an Indigenous challenge, because it makes it, everyone else is constantly then off the hook and doesn't see their own place in the story. And I'm always trying to say we need to see our place in this story, and we need to figure out what we have to do to go forward. So I think the simpler we can keep it as a story, without the overwhelming long list of technical things that some people will need to understand really well, but most people won't be able to, the more people can see their place in it. And that's always what I'm trying to work us towards a place where we have a new normal, and a new normal where you don't have to talk about housing and water and all of that as if that's a gesture of reconciliation. That's not reconciliation. That's basic rights that should exist, and it's the absence of that leads us to a place where we have to call for extraordinary gestures of reconciliation. You know, we've got to start digging our own holes and jumping into them. You know, we've got to find a way to do better than that.
I'd like to say, really, so much, because as I was listening to the questions and to, you know, and starting with the question about closure, I was thinking about how, and you mentioned this, that this was a class action by the survivors. And it was made political in the House of Commons, where the government, and the Assembly of First Nations, and under the leadership of Phil Fontaine, our national chief at the time, had made the agreement with the government that they would then be the ones who would take the money and process the commission through government channels. And that was a political decision on a class action. So I know that the national chief did not want to lose this opportunity, and that was a really important decision, political decision, but it also put the funding in the hands of the government. So people see this as a government mechanism, and talk about government's roles. Whereas I think what Marie's book so clearly articulates is the role that each individual has in making reconciliation possible. And her book is a call to all of you. And I think that that's really what reconciliation is about, in the idea of the compensation agreement in the beginning, and what the TRC would be, is that it's not a government program, it's about every single one of us. And I think that that's where Marie's voice so clearly speaks to Canada, and also what we can do together, that we are greater together. This is really a great opportunity for Canada. And I'd like to just once again thank you, Marie, for giving this to us. And thank you, Jennifer, for using your recovered journalistic skills today. Thank you.
Thank you to all of tonight's speakers. We will now ask you to remain in place while we walk Dr. Marie Wilson over to the signing table, which will be on the right side of our cash desk. On that signing table, you can procure a book to be signed. We will walk by you with a Post-it note to get your name down before we pass it along to Marie. And we ask you to not forget to pay for the book before you leave.
Yes, right.
Yeah, that's happened before.
I've done that.
And can I just tell you my new mantra?
Yep.
Buy once, buy often. Because I think of how many of you work in agencies where actually there are people who work with you who might benefit from knowing more about all of this. And I know lots of organizations spend a lot of money on t-shirts and all kinds of other stuff. And maybe we should spend some money on books and help people understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Your bag. No, I have it. And it's on that chair.
I have to go buy the book too.
Yeah.
Yes, I do on the side.